The wheels of Emma Sterling's wheelchair caught between two weathered cobblestones outside Boston Memorial Hospital, jerking the 8-year-old to an abrupt stop. Her mother, Victoria Sterling, knelt in her charcoal business suit, struggling with the mechanism as October wind whipped fallen leaves around them. "We've exhausted every treatment option," Dr. Harrison had informed Victoria that morning, his words cutting through the medical terminology like a blade through silk. "The spinal cord damage is complete. Emma will require lifelong wheelchair assistance." Victoria commanded boardrooms worth billions. As CEO of Sterling Medical Innovations, she had transformed her late father's research company into a pharmaceutical empire. She negotiated with venture capitalists who controlled global markets and spoke at conferences that shaped medical policy worldwide. Yet here, defeated by broken pavement, her executive authority meant nothing. "I'm stuck again, Mommy," Emma whispered, resignation heavy in her small voice. Before the accident, Emma had been fearless, racing bikes through neighborhood streets, climbing oak trees in their backyard, spinning through ballet routines with reckless joy. Now she spoke carefully, as if raising her voice might shatter whatever remained of her diminished world. Victoria's phone buzzed insistently with messages from Sterling Medical's board of directors. Another emergency meeting called by David Morrison, the research director who had been questioning her leadership with increasing boldness since her father's death 3 years ago. "Let me help her." The voice came from behind them, carrying absolute certainty. Victoria turned to see a tall man approaching through the morning mist, his dark hair touching his jacket collar. He wore faded jeans and a worn leather coat that had seen better decades. A small girl with bright brown eyes held his hand, pink backpack bouncing as she hurried beside him. Everything about this stranger contradicted the polished specialists Victoria consulted regularly. Where they arrived in expensive suits carrying impressive credentials, this man looked like he belonged fixing motorcycles rather than treating patients. "I don't need assistance," Victoria replied curtly, though clearly she did. Ignoring her protest, the man knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. His movements carried professional precision as he examined the stuck mechanism. But his manner of speaking made Victoria pause. "These old pathways like to grab wheels sometimes," he told Emma, tone warm and matter of fact. "But we're definitely smarter than some old stones, don't you think?" Most adults now addressed Emma with careful sympathy, their voices artificially bright with forced optimism. This stranger spoke to her like a capable person deserving respect, not a fragile case requiring delicate handling. "I'm Sophie," announced the little girl, settling cross-legged on damp pavement without concern for her purple leggings. "My daddy helps hurt people feel better." "Do you come here lots?" "Every month," Emma replied quietly, then surprised Victoria by adding, "For appointments that never change anything." The casual honesty startled Victoria. Emma hadn't spoken so openly with anyone since the accident 4 months ago. While Sophie chatted with Emma about stuffed animals and doctor games, Victoria studied the man's hands as he worked. His movements were too knowledgeable, too precise to be coincidental. When he tested Emma's reflexes with subtle pressure points, Victoria knew she was watching someone with extensive medical training. "You're not a mechanic," she observed. He met her gaze directly, eyes holding familiar intensity. "No, I'm Dr. Michael Chen. I worked with your father for 7 years. Recognition hit Victoria like cold water. Michael Chen, the brilliant protege her father had mentioned countless times during family dinners. The surgeon who had vanished from Boston's medical community under mysterious circumstances 3 years ago. "Dr. Chen," she breathed, memories flooding back. "You collaborated on the neural regeneration research. Until your father's death." Michael stood slowly, attention shifting between Victoria and Emma. "I read about Emma's accident in the medical journals. When I saw the Sterling name, I had to come." Sophie continued entertaining Emma with stories about her toy medical kit, seemingly unaware of the weighted conversation above them. "Your father entrusted me with his final research notes before he died," Michael continued, voice carrying quiet authority. "Documentation on spinal cord regeneration that conventional medicine isn't prepared to accept. I believe those methods could help Emma." Victoria's chest tightened. Her father's final research remained sealed in his private laboratory. She had assumed all crucial work had been published or transferred to Sterling Medical's research division. That's impossible. We've consulted the world's leading neurologists, specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, even Switzerland. They confirmed complete spinal cord severance. Michael's gaze moved to Emma, who was now giggling at something Sophie had whispered, the first genuine laughter Victoria had heard from her daughter in months. Sometimes prestigious institutions become limited by their own protocols, he said carefully. They diagnose based on what they expect to find, not necessarily what's actually present. Can you really make me walk again? Emma asked suddenly, her question cutting through adult conversation like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Michael knelt to Emma's eye level, expression serious but warm. I can try something other doctors haven't attempted, but it would mean trusting me with something very precious, your possibility for recovery. Victoria felt her throat constrict, not from grief but from something far more dangerous. Hope she had forced herself to abandon weeks ago. One session, she heard herself saying. You can have one session with Emma, but I supervise everything, and at any sign of problems, we stop immediately. Michael nodded, understanding the magnitude of trust she offered. That's all I need. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, Sophie chattering excitedly about games she and Emma could play during treatment, Victoria studied Michael Chen with growing curiosity. There was something about his presence that went beyond medical expertise, a quality suggesting he understood suffering in ways textbooks couldn't teach. She didn't know this moment would shatter everything she thought she understood about healing, corporate loyalty, and the cost of miracles. She had no idea that trusting him would force her to confront medical board investigations, corporate espionage, and betrayals threatening both her company and daughter's future. And she couldn't imagine that the man in worn denim would soon fight not just for Emma's mobility, but for his own right to practice medicine at all. Over the following 3 weeks, Michael's treatment sessions became the brightest part of Emma's existence. He arrived daily with Sophie and his medical equipment, a fascinating combination of sophisticated neural stimulation devices and colorful supplies that Sophie insisted were for very important medical emergencies. Victoria had expected sterile medical procedures like those she'd witnessed with other specialists. Instead, she observed something that challenged her understanding of healing entirely. Michael approached Emma's treatment through scientific rigor combined with creative playfulness, unlike anything previous doctors had attempted. Where they had been technical and detached, he engaged warmly. Where they focused exclusively on Emma's physical condition, he treated her as a complete person whose emotional state directly impacted recovery. Brains don't distinguish between therapy and fun, Michael explained to Victoria one afternoon as they watched the girls playing an elaborate game requiring Emma to focus intensely on specific muscle movements. They only recognize engagement versus disengagement. Your father understood that principle. Each mention of her father created complex emotions in Victoria's chest. Curiosity mixed with unprocessed grief, creating an ache both painful and oddly comforting. The most remarkable aspect of Michael's approach was Sophie's natural integration into treatment sessions. While Michael guided Emma through physical exercises, Sophie engaged her in imaginative scenarios requiring precise movements. Dr. Sophie needs a super important assistant to hold this special light, Sophie would announce gravely, positioning Emma's arm exactly as Michael had been encouraging. This is very serious medicine for Mr. Rabbit's hurt leg. Sophie's natural interaction with Emma, without awkwardness or sympathy, created an environment where therapy became adventure and medical progress became shared play. Victoria, initially planning to monitor every moment vigilantly, gradually found herself retreating to observe from the corner. She watched in amazement as her daughter, the same child who had been withdrawn and silent since the accident, began laughing again. 3 weeks into treatment, something extraordinary occurred. Michael was demonstrating a new exercise designed to strengthen neural pathways to Emma's feet when the little girl suddenly gasped, eyes widening with wonder. I felt that, she exclaimed, staring at her foot in disbelief. I felt my big toe move! Victoria rushed to Emma's side, watching in astonishment as Emma concentrated intensely and produced a slight but unmistakable wiggle of her big toe. It represented the first voluntary movement below her injury site since the accident. Tears flowed down Victoria's cheeks as she looked at Michael, who maintained professional composure despite the breakthrough. She could see quiet satisfaction in his expression, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "This marks just the beginning," he told Emma gently. "Your brain is remembering how to communicate with your legs. Progress requires time and patience." Sophie clapped enthusiastically as if Emma had just scored the winning goal in championship competition. "You did magic, just like my daddy does for hurt people." That evening, Victoria's world began collapsing from multiple directions simultaneously. David Morrison had been waiting for this opportunity for months. As research director of Sterling Medical Innovations, David had watched Victoria struggle with CEO responsibilities while managing Emma's medical crisis. He'd observed her increasing reliance on an unknown doctor with suspicious credentials. Now, armed with information that could destroy both Victoria's leadership and Michael Chen's career, David felt the corporate tide turning in his favor. The Sterling Medical boardroom commanded spectacular views of Boston's financial district through floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria entered that Thursday morning expecting to discuss quarterly earnings and upcoming clinical trials. Instead, she found 5 board members seated around mahogany conference table with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed hostility. "Before we address quarterly reports," David began, without preamble, activating the room's projection system, "we need to discuss serious liability issues regarding your daughter's unauthorized treatment." Headlines filled the massive screen. "Surgeon's experimental treatment kills cancer patient." "Harvard Medical investigates doctor after wife's death." "Controversial neural stimulation ends in tragedy." "Dr. Michael Chen faced malpractice charges 3 years ago," David announced, tone carrying practiced corporate concern. "He used experimental neural stimulation on his terminally ill wife, directly resulting in her death. Legal proceedings were settled confidentially, and he disappeared from Boston's medical community immediately afterward." Victoria stared at the damning evidence, feeling solid ground dissolve beneath her feet. After weeks of growing trust in Michael's expertise, this revelation felt like personal betrayal. "The liability exposure for Sterling Medical is enormous," continued Patricia Wells, the board's risk management specialist. "Should anything happen to Emma during these unauthorized treatments, we face both personal tragedy and corporate liability, potentially destroying this company." "Who was the patient?" Victoria asked, though she suspected the devastating answer. "Emily Chen, his wife," David replied, watching Victoria's expression carefully. "According to court documents, Dr. Chen convinced her to undergo experimental neural stimulation that accelerated tumor growth and hastened her death." The boardroom fell silent except for ventilation system humming. Victoria felt physically ill, not just from the revelation, but from its implications. Had she entrusted her daughter's care to someone whose judgment had been so catastrophically compromised by personal desperation? Furthermore, David continued, producing additional documents, "Investigation reveals that Victoria has been using company facilities, including our private therapy wing, for these unauthorized treatments without board approval. This constitutes misuse of corporate resources for personal benefit." Victoria realized David had been building a case against her systematically, possibly for months. Every decision regarding Emma's treatment was being reframed as corporate misconduct. "I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in Victoria's leadership," David declared, words hitting like hammer blows. "Her decision to allow unauthorized medical experimentation on her own daughter, using a doctor with a history of patient death, demonstrates fundamentally compromised judgment, endangering both Emma and this company." Board members shifted uncomfortably, but Victoria could see agreement in their expressions. In corporate America, perception mattered more than truth, and these perceptions were devastating. "The board will vote on Victoria's removal as CEO next Monday," David announced with confidence, suggesting he'd already counted votes. "Until then, I'm recommending immediate suspension of all experimental treatments involving Dr. Chen." Victoria left the meeting feeling her carefully constructed world collapsing simultaneously from professional and personal directions. That evening, she confronted Michael in her home study, placing the damaging file on her coffee table. "Were you planning to tell me about Emily?" she asked, struggling to maintain composure. Michael examined the documents, then looked directly into her eyes. "Yes, when you were ready to understand what really happened." Ready? You're treating my daughter with methods that killed your wife. Pain flashed across Michael's face with such intensity, Victoria almost regretted her words. Almost. Emily was dying, he said quietly. Stage 4 glioblastoma with multiple brain tumors. Conventional treatments had failed completely. She had maybe 3 weeks remaining when we began experimental neural stimulation protocol. His composure strengthened as he continued. The treatment was based on your father's research, the same principles I'm using with Emma. Emily volunteered knowing the risks because the alternative was certain death within days. Michael walked to the window, shoulders carrying 3 years of accumulated grief and guilt. Initially, the treatment worked remarkably. Emily's tumors began shrinking, and she regained cognitive function we'd thought was lost forever. For 6 weeks, we believed we'd achieved the impossible. His words broke slightly. Then her immune system, weakened by months of chemotherapy, rejected the neural implants. Not because of the treatment protocol, but because her body could no longer fight the infections. Victoria felt her anger wavering, replaced by something more complex and painful to process. Emily's family couldn't accept that cancer killed her, Michael continued. They needed someone to blame for their loss, and I provided an easy target. The medical board investigation lasted 9 months. Your father testified extensively on my behalf, providing all his research documentation as evidence that our treatment protocol was medically sound. He turned to face Victoria, eyes bright with unshed tears. The case was dismissed with complete exoneration. But by then, damage was irreversible. No hospital would offer employment. Research facilities wouldn't return calls. So Sophie and I moved to Portland, where I work at a small rehabilitation clinic helping people who can't afford prestigious specialists. Victoria studied the file, realizing how expertly David Morrison had manipulated information to serve his agenda. Headlines emphasized malpractice and death, while ignoring exoneration and desperate circumstances that prompted experimental treatment. Why didn't you explain this initially? She asked. Because 3 years ago, I learned that truth becomes irrelevant when people aren't prepared to hear it. You needed to witness what I could accomplish with Emma before trusting my judgment about what happened to Emily. 2 days later, Victoria's phone rang during a tense strategy meeting with Sterling Medical's legal team. Emma's school was calling to report a severe medical emergency during lunch period. Victoria arrived at Boston Children's Hospital to find Emma unconscious in intensive care, connected to machines monitoring every heartbeat and breath. Sophie sat in the hallway clutching a worn teddy bear, tears streaming down her small face. What happened? Victoria demanded of the attending physician. Severe anaphylactic shock, Dr. Reynolds replied grimly. Someone gave her food containing peanut oil, a substance she's never shown sensitivity to previously. This appears to be newly developed hypersensitivity, possibly related to neural stimulation treatments. Victoria felt the world spinning dangerously. Emma had never displayed food allergies. The timing, just days after the board meeting, seemed impossibly coincidental. Is Emma going to be okay? Sophie whispered, tugging Victoria's jacket with small, frightened hands. Where's your daddy? Victoria asked, kneeling beside the terrified child. Talking to scary people about Emma's medicine, Sophie replied, pointing toward a conference room where Victoria could see Michael in animated discussion with hospital administrators and what appeared to be medical board investigators. Dr. Reynolds lowered his tone. Mrs. Sterling, I must inform you that the State Medical Board has opened formal investigation into Dr. Chen's treatment of your daughter. They're questioning whether unauthorized neural stimulation could have triggered this allergic response. Victoria realized with crystalline clarity that David Morrison had orchestrated this crisis. The peanut oil exposure hadn't been accidental. It had been calculated sabotage designed to discredit Michael and create medical emergency supporting David's claims about reckless treatment. But proving conspiracy seemed impossible while her daughter fought for life. Emma remained unconscious for 22 hours. When she finally opened her eyes, the first word she spoke was, Sophie? I'm right here, Sophie whispered, carefully climbing onto the hospital bed despite nurse protests. Daddy and me been taking super good care of you. Emma smiled weakly, then attempted to move her legs. Victoria held her breath, praying the medical crisis hadn't reversed Emma's progress. To everyone's amazement, Emma could still move her toes. The neural pathways Michael had helped establish remained completely intact. The treatment didn't cause her allergic reaction, Emma's neurologist confirmed privately. If anything, Dr. Chen's neural stimulation protocols may have protected spinal cord function during the crisis. Without that neurological protection, the shock might have caused additional permanent damage. But by then, damage to Michael's reputation was complete. The medical board suspended his license pending investigation. Social services questioned his parental fitness, threatening to remove Sophie from his care. Media painted him as a reckless doctor whose experimental treatments nearly killed a child. Victoria watched from Emma's hospital room as the man who had restored her daughter's hope became target of systematic character assassination orchestrated by her own company's research director. She realized that saving Emma would require more than medical miracles. It would demand fighting corporate conspiracy, medical politics, and her own board of directors. Time was running out rapidly. Victoria Sterling had built her career on calculated risks and strategic decision-making. But as she sat beside Emma's hospital bed, watching medical board investigators confiscate Michael's research materials, she understood that everything she'd worked to build was disintegrating simultaneously. "They're suspending my medical license," Michael informed her quietly, exhaustion evident in every word. "The board claims I practiced beyond authority and endangered a patient. Sophie and I return to Portland tomorrow." Emma, still weak from her allergic reaction, but increasingly alert, gripped Sophie's hand with desperate intensity. "You can't leave. We're supposed to practice walking together." "I know, sweetheart," Michael replied, kneeling beside Emma's bed. "But sometimes grown-ups create complications that aren't fair to kids." Victoria felt something crystallize inside her chest. Fury so focused it surprised her with its intensity. For the first time since her father's death, she understood what it meant to fight for something more important than profit margins and market positioning. "Sophie," she said calmly, "would you like to watch something special on my phone while your daddy and I talk privately?" She showed Sophie a video of Emma's first successful toe movement, watching the 6-year-old's face brighten with excitement. Then Victoria turned to Michael with an expression that would have terrified corporate rivals. "David Morrison orchestrated Emma's allergic reaction," she stated without preamble. Michael's eyes widened, but he didn't immediately dismiss the accusation. "That's an extremely serious allegation. He accessed Emma's school records through our corporate insurance database. He knew her lunch schedule, dietary preferences, even her classroom seating chart." Victoria's tone carried analytical precision she employed during hostile corporate takeovers. The peanut oil exposure wasn't random. It was targeted, timed, and documented for maximum impact. Victoria displayed conference room security footage on her laptop, showing David Morrison and extended phone conversations during the exact time frame of Emma's emergency. "He contacted board members before the hospital even reached me," she continued. "He had prepared talking points about your dangerous treatments before doctors had diagnosed the allergic reaction." Michael studied the evidence with careful attention he applied to medical diagnostics. "This still doesn't constitute proof of conspiracy. Maybe not in criminal court, but it proves David has been systematically undermining Emma's treatment to position himself for corporate takeover." Victoria's expression hardened further. "Sterling Medical is valued at $3 billion. David Morrison has been maneuvering to remove me as CEO since my father's death. Emma's recovery under your care threatened his narrative that I'm incompetent leadership prioritizing family over corporate responsibility. The implications settled between them like gathering storm clouds." "There's more," Victoria continued, dropping her voice to whisper. "I accessed my father's sealed financial records yesterday. David Morrison has been selling our proprietary neural regeneration research to competing pharmaceutical companies for the past 18 months. Michael's expression shifted from resignation to focused intensity. "That's corporate espionage. Worse than that, he's been deliberately sabotaging our research projects to suppress Sterling Medical's stock value while quietly purchasing shares through offshore shell companies." Victoria showed Michael financial records displaying David's suspicious trading patterns and international account transfers. Emma's recovery would prove neural regeneration technology viability and potentially increase our company valuation by billions. Victoria pulled up additional documentation, revealing David's systematic insider trading scheme. He needed Emma's treatment to fail publicly and dramatically. Your success threatened to expose both his corporate sabotage and his securities fraud. Michael stood slowly, processing implications. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we finish what my father started and you've continued, but we do it properly, with my resources, in my father's private laboratory that David Morrison doesn't know exists. She handed Michael a silver key card that gleamed in the hospital room's fluorescent lighting. Everything my father was working on remains there. Research notes, prototype equipment, neural mapping data 3 years ahead of anything in published literature. I'm granting you access to complete his work and prove your treatment protocol can restore Emma's full mobility. Michael examined the key card as if it contained secrets of the universe. The medical board will revoke your corporate licenses if they discover unauthorized research. Let them try. I control 62% of Sterling Medical's voting shares. David Morrison convinced 4 board members to support his coup, but he needs a supermajority to remove me. If we can prove Emma's complete recovery while exposing his corporate crimes simultaneously, his support collapses entirely. Victoria's phone buzzed with urgent text from her corporate attorney. Emergency board meeting scheduled Monday morning. Motion to remove you as CEO and transfer Emma's guardianship pending child endangerment investigation. They're accelerating their timeline, Victoria murmured, showing Michael the message. How long do we have? Michael asked. 72 hours to prove your treatment works completely, and David Morrison is a criminal. Victoria's smile carried predatory confidence that had made her legendary in corporate negotiations. Think you can handle that pressure? Michael's response surprised her with quiet intensity. For Emma and Sophie, I can handle anything. Over the next 3 days, Victoria Sterling did something she hadn't attempted since childhood. She broke her own company's rules. Her father's private research facility occupied the entire 40th floor of Sterling Medical's headquarters. Accessible only through hidden elevator, requiring both biometric scanning and physical keys. Victoria had visited twice since her father's death, both times leaving within minutes because memories were overwhelming. Now accompanied by Michael and both girls, she felt her father's presence not as grief but as guidance toward completing his life's work. This is like a spaceship, Sophie breathed, staring at equipment belonging in science fiction rather than conventional medicine. Emma, still weak but determined, navigated her wheelchair between research stations with growing excitement. Grandpa James really built all this for kids like me? He built it for children exactly like you, Victoria replied, finally understanding her father's true legacy. Michael moved through the laboratory with reverent familiarity, hands tracing instruments and computer terminals he had helped design years earlier. James always believed this research would revolutionize everything, he murmured, accessing computer files containing 3 years of posthumous medical advancement. He just needed someone brave enough to complete the implementation. The following 60 hours passed in intensive focus of neural mapping, equipment calibration, and the most complex medical procedure any of them had witnessed. Michael, working with research data surpassing anything in published literature, implemented neural regeneration protocol that was simultaneously aggressive and precise. Emma, supported by Sophie's constant encouragement and Victoria's unwavering determination, endured 8 hours of sophisticated neural stimulation designed to rebuild damaged pathways in her spinal cord. The process wasn't without setbacks. Emma experienced severe headaches, temporary muscle spasms, and moments of discouragement when progress seemed to stall. Sophie remained by her side throughout, offering juice boxes and reading stories during difficult moments. At 6:15 a.m. Monday morning, 45 minutes before the board meeting that would determine Victoria's future as CEO, Emma Sterling stood up from her wheelchair and walked across her grandfather's laboratory. Her initial steps were tentative, but unmistakably intentional. Her legs, silent for 5 months, responded to brain commands with increasing confidence. By the time she reached the far wall, she was walking with near-normal coordination. Sophie cheered loudly enough to wake the entire building. Michael wept openly for the first time in 3 years. Victoria felt her heart simultaneously break and heal completely. I can walk, Emma announced, words carrying joy that could illuminate entire cities. Sophie, look, I can really truly walk. The board meeting that morning became corporate history. Victoria entered the conference room with Emma walking confidently beside her, accompanied by Michael in perfectly pressed suit, emphasizing his professional credentials. Sophie sat quietly in corner chair, coloring in a children's book about doctors while occasionally offering medical observations that startled the adults. David Morrison's prepared presentation about Victoria's incompetent leadership collapsed within minutes when confronted with Emma's obvious recovery and documented evidence of his corporate crimes. The FBI agents who attended the meeting, summoned by Victoria's weekend phone calls to federal prosecutors, arrested David Morrison for securities fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit assault on a minor child. The medical board investigators who had planned to recommend permanent suspension of Michael's license instead found themselves reviewing documentation, proving his treatment protocol represented the most significant breakthrough in neural regeneration medicine in 2 decades. Dr. Chen's work validates everything my father believed about neuroplasticity, Victoria announced to the stunned board members. Rather than questioning his methods, we should be grateful that Sterling Medical has exclusive access to research that will revolutionize spinal cord treatment worldwide. 6 months later, the Sterling Chen Foundation for Pediatric Neural Recovery opened its doors in a renovated wing of Boston Children's Hospital. Emma Sterling, now running and dancing again, served as the foundation's youngest ambassador. "A year ago, doctors told my mom I would never walk again," Emma announced at the foundation's opening ceremony, her words carrying confidence of someone who had stared down impossible odds and won. "But my mom found Dr. Michael, and Dr. Michael found hope where everyone else saw only problems." From the audience, Victoria watched with a heart so full of gratitude it seemed impossible to contain. "Today, I want to tell other kids like me that never is just a word people use when they're not brave enough to try something new," Emma continued. "And I want to tell their moms and dads that sometimes the best doctors are the ones who don't look like regular doctors." The foundation, endowed with $400 million from Sterling Medical's research budget, would provide free neural regeneration treatment to children whose families couldn't afford experimental procedures. Michael Chen, fully reinstated with enhanced medical credentials and appointed as the foundation's chief medical director, would lead research combining Dr. James Sterling's theoretical breakthroughs with practical treatment protocols proven effective on patients like Emma. Sophie Chen, now officially Emma's little sister through Victoria's adoption, would grow up in a household where medical miracles were considered normal parts of daily life. And Victoria Sterling, no longer merely a CEO, but a mother who had learned that the most important acquisitions were the people you chose to love, would spend her career transforming her father's dream of healing into reality for thousands of children who needed someone brave enough to say, "Let me help." 2 years after the foundation's launch, Emma and Sophie presented their joint science project at Boston Elementary School's annual fair. Their display, titled "How Hope and Science Work Together," featured photos of Emma's recovery journey alongside testimonials from 50 children the foundation had helped. "The best medicine," their project concluded, "isn't always in hospitals or fancy laboratories. Sometimes it's in believing that tomorrow can be better than today, even when everyone else says it's impossible." The story that began with broken pavement and strangers' kindness became foundation for hope, reaching children whose names they would never know, in cities they would never visit, giving them the gift Emma had received. Knowledge that love combined with determination could overcome anything the world presented. In the end, healing happened not because of advanced technology or corporate resources, but because people chose to trust each other with the most precious things they possessed: their children, their hope, and their faith that miracles sometimes wear work boots and speak with gentle voices that refuse to accept impossible,